inspections, we have not found any smoking gun.
With the threat of war much closer now, tension is on the rise.
Events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision.
Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons. Saddam Hussein has used such weapons. And Saddam Hussein has no compunction about using them again.
We are confident that no one will find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq because there are none.
The security of the world requires disarming Saddam Hussein now.
The majority of the council confirmed that they do not want to authorize the use of force.
Sometimes, and in particular dealing with a dictator, the only chance of peace is a readiness for war.
What they are facing is a definite death.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
It was an ultimatum that put Saddam Hussein on final notice. An ultimatum delivered in defiance of the UN Security Council. An ultimatum the Iraqi leadership would immediately reject. For the second time in little more than a decade, the United States was primed for war with Iraq. This time, there was no broad-based UN coalition supporting military action. Instead, the U.S. was virtually going it alone.
This was a landmark moment in U.S. diplomatic history.
Even France, Germany, and Russia broke ranks with the Bush administration over a UN resolution authorizing the use of force against Iraq, a resolution doomed by the UN Security Council.
President Chirac said it very clearly. He would vote no to a resolution authorizing at the present stage the use of force.
It was a very big deal that the Bush administration did not listen to the Security Council because by not listening to it, it relegated it to kind of a dustbin-like status, saying you were a relic of some other era. You're not relevant right now.
It also fueled suspicion in the Arab world.
They believe that the major strategic objective of the American invasion is to subjugate Iraqis, is to control their oil resources, and of course, to change the landscape, the regional landscape as a whole.
The President of the United States.
One of the few world leaders lined up behind President Bush, British Prime Minister Tony Blair.
This is a tough choice indeed, but it is also a stark one. To stand British troops down now and turn back, or to hold firm to the course that we have set. And I believe passionately we must hold firm to that course.
When this war gets studied years from now, it will be the Bush-Blair go-it-alone tactic. They called it the coalition of the willing, but it was truly the coalition of the few.
One of the consequences, the U.S. military was forced to adjust its war plan when Turkey, a key NATO ally, refused to let American troops use its territory as a launching pad into northern Iraq. The Pentagon had to decide whether to wait for the redeployment of the troops originally slated for Turkey.
They made the decision to go ahead, and what that left was a force that was short one division plus some other supporting elements.
The U.S. was now ready to launch what would be a preemptive strike.
Loading!
An almost unprecedented U.S. action stemming from a policy that came to be called the Bush Doctrine.
The Bush Doctrine stated very clearly that the United States doesn't have to cooperate with anybody, that if we feel a threat of being bombed or being attacked by a foreign power, we're going to strike.
As President Bush's 48-hour deadline ticked down, nervous Iraqis in Baghdad began preparing for what was becoming more and more inevitable.
On the surface, life seemed to go on like normal. People would drive into the city, there'd be traffic jams in the morning going into the center of Baghdad. The stores were still open. Underneath that, people were concerned. They were expressing concern about what would happen during the war. They were very worried about the bombing. They'd seen what had happened in 1991. They were worried about the potential for chaos when the war ended.
Lined up along the Kuwaiti border, U.S. troops played their own tense waiting game. Almost 200,000 troops from the U.S.-led coalition marked time waiting for war.
The Marines had been in Kuwait for well over a month, and all they were talking about was, either let's go to war or let's go home. They were sick and tired of waiting in the deserts.
They were frightened. They were worried. They were anxious to see how they'd hold up.
Adding to the anxiety in the desert, fear of a chemical weapons attack.
The key moment when I realized it was going to happen was the day that they came to us and said, all right, those chemical warfare suits that you were all given, that you kept in the plastic wrap, open them, put them on. And this time it was thought it was serious, that the threat of chemical use is high.
The tyrant will soon be gone. The day of your liberation is near.
I think that once the president made that speech that was listened by the commanders overnight on the radio, I think that the following day everybody realized that, it was going to be a question of hours before the order to go into Iraq was going to come. And I really felt that the mood really changed then.
Early Wednesday morning, March 19th, a little more than 12 hours before the ultimatum deadline was set to expire, President Bush called his war council together to set the final plan for the military campaign.
He comes into the Situation Room. This is all done by video link, but they know this is the meeting. It is just quintessential Bush in that it's described as a very emotional meeting, but also a very business-like meeting. He goes around to each of the commanders. Do you have everything you need? Are you comfortable with the plan? They all respond in sequence in the affirmative to both questions. So then he tells General Franks, go. And Bush was leaving. He was turning around to walk out, but he turns back and he gives General Franks a salute, and General Franks salutes back, and off he goes.
But the war plan would quickly change. Day was dawning in Baghdad when the sound of air raid sirens and anti-aircraft fire pierced the early morning silence. It was March 20th, 5:33 a.m. in Baghdad. The attack on Iraq had begun. But it wasn't the shock and awe the Pentagon had promised. It was a surgical strike instead.
The CIA Director Tenet is over at the Pentagon, and he's over there having a meeting with Rumsfeld and others over there when they get this intelligence.
An Iraqi agent for the CIA on the ground. And from that source and perhaps others, the CIA was convinced that Saddam Hussein and possibly one or more of his sons were probably in that facility at that time.
And so they insist on a meeting with the president. When they come rushing over, it's about 3:30 in the afternoon, and they come back into the White House and they show the president, we think this is real, we think it's legit, we think he's there, and we think he's going to be there for a few hours at least, and we think we should hit him. And General Franks has told them he needs to know by 7:15. And finally, at 7:12, with 3 minutes to spare, Bush says go. And they call Tommy Franks and they say launch.
U.S. forces fired about 36 Tomahawk missiles and dropped a pair of 2,000-pound satellite-guided bombs.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It was a risk to win the war in a single stroke.
A risk that didn't pay off. Just a few hours after the strike, Saddam Hussein appeared on Iraqi television in what was billed as a live appearance.
Iraq will be victorious, God willing. And with Iraq, our nation and humanity will be victorious.
But was it really Saddam or a body double? Was it live or taped beforehand? Was Saddam Hussein dead or alive?
We just heard an intel. What the hell?
we were sitting at the Kuwait side of the line of departure, it was dark and there was some sort of whoosh missile overhead.
Can you hear me? Atlanta, we just heard something shooting.
Iraq responded to the U.S. strike with a volley of missiles aimed at coalition ground troops still amassed in Kuwait.
Take shelter in the nearest Scud bunker. Put on your flak jacket and helmet.
This is the 9th time now we'll open as many hours, roughly.
We had 16 of them in 12 hours one day, but every time that noise went off, it just made this sort of high-pitched, screeching noise that was followed by some guy in a sort of very monotone voice saying, bunker, 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 gas, gas, gas.
The bunker calls kept troops on edge, but the warnings turned out to be false alarms. At the same time, an advanced type of Patriot missile kept the Iraqi surface-to-surface missiles from inflicting any casualties. It wasn't the only technological advance since the first Gulf War.
This is the system that as we travel north is going to give me situational awareness on all the other units.
Okay, have a seat.
Lieutenant General David McKiernan was taking advantage of other 21st century technology to head up the ground war.
Okay, go.
I want you to immediately establish a planning link with 5th Corps.
This is exclusive video of the headquarters for the ground war against Iraq, shot as the war unfolded. McKiernan's war room overlooked a high-tech operations center. The network of satellites, computers, and operatives on the ground gave him an unprecedented view of the entire battlefield.
What the technology allows you to do is see where all our formations are on the digital terrain. It allows me to see where the airframes are, where the carrier battle groups are.
The decapitation strike and reports that fires were blazing in the Rumalia oil fields in southern Iraq put the war room to the test right away. McKiernan and his commanders persuaded Tommy Franks and CENTCOM to move early to protect the southern oil fields.
We were told to secure the southern Rumalia oil fields up to the canal because that was where the key infrastructure was.
The war plan suddenly shifted. The start date of the ground war moved up.
I think we achieved a certain degree of tactical and operational surprise by going early to secure the southern part of the Rumalia oil fields.
But troops in Kuwait were still in the dark about when the ground war would start.
We tried to figure out a way to send a signal just to let CNN know, all right, the blackout period has begun.
At 2 a.m., troops got word the ground war had begun.
So when I heard the commotion outside, heard the feet, the boots come on the wood floor in the tent, and start to hear this shut down, I immediately had my cell phone in the sleeping bag and keyed it and sent it off. And it was just an image of two people, I think, dancing. But that had always been the code, that the embargo had begun, that you wouldn't hear from us until the shooting had started. The dance had begun.
Imagine for a moment a giant wave of steel sweeping across the southern Iraqi desert.
The unit just seemed to break out into a line and drive at what seemed like a reckless speed.
This giant wave of steel that grows every hour is ever pushing northward, ever pushing toward the Iraqi capital.
It was just an unbelievable experience. It was almost a race to Baghdad.
So powerful is this force which is building out here in the desert. It is bold, it is audacious, it is fast, and it is traveling far.
That feeling of elation and jubilation, it was the best propaganda.
On the President's order, coalition forces began the ground war to disarm Iraq and liberate the Iraqi people.
The start came a couple of days early, but the entrance was no less dramatic. The Army's 3rd Infantry Division roared into southern Iraq with the 7th Cavalry leading the way.
We were the tip of the spear. We were farthest out in front of the regular army.
The war plan dictated that the army would cut westward and then north through the open desert in an effort to put early pressure on the capital and the Iraqi regime.
Move as rapidly as you can. Get the distance, move out, get the maneuver space, see if there's resistance out there, clear the path.
U.S. Marines and British forces would head up the Euphrates, largely bypassing what were anticipated to be friendly cities and taking bridges, with the goal, eventually, to secure the most direct route to Baghdad. The televised images of U.S. and British forces on Iraqi soil struck a psychological blow.
There was a wave of steel, and it was descending on Baghdad. And no matter what channel you turned into, you saw it.
But denial reigned in the capital.
They have distributed a tape showing only a desert and some military vehicles moving in that desert. Where is this desert?
Huge explosion. Get to the window. Get away from the window.
CNN's Nick Robertson saw Iraqi reaction to U.S. incursions firsthand as he reported from Baghdad, all the while being monitored by Iraqi minders.
They were shaken, the war had started. The minder on that first and second day, he almost went into shock when he heard that Marines had crossed the border and were traveling into Iraq.
There were bombs over Baghdad, and the ground campaign was in full swing. Iraqi officials were so incensed by what they were seeing on CNN that Robertson and his team were expelled the next day. The night before they left the country, another blow to the regime.
This was the beginning, essentially, of the war that we'd heard about, the shock and awe.
It's basically the idea of creating the perception at the beginning or at some point in the conflict that the result is inevitable.
A-Day, the letter A, not D-Day, suggesting that this is the beginning of the shock and awe campaign tonight, night 3 of the war in Iraq.
Huge fireballs erupting, but multiple fireballs. Bang, 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 all in the same area. Huge clouds of black smoke coming up. The lights were still on in the city, which was strange. So you had almost this backlit effect behind it. It was an Armageddon-like feeling.
According to U.S. intelligence, there is, quote, complete confusion, quote, complete disarray in the senior Iraqi military leadership.
This will be a campaign unlike any other in history. A campaign characterized by shock, by surprise, by flexibility, by the employment of precise munitions on a scale never before seen, and by the application of overwhelming force.
But for all the hype, there was a lingering sense that shock and awe had fallen short.
I thought that it would be so horrendously intense, that there would be so many more places hit, that I think, and I also perhaps thought by the end of that night, well, I've seen it and I've witnessed it, and yes, it was shocking and awesome, but it wasn't that shocking and awesome.
The Pentagon, however, was banking on the psychological impact it would have on the Iraqi regime.
If you had been on the ground in Baghdad and you've been trying to protect critical assets and you watched it come every night and then night and day, relentlessly, you knew that there was no surviving this.
In southern Iraq, it seemed to be working. Iraqi forces appeared to be surrendering. Marines had been sent to secure the port of Qasr, which was a vital element in the plan to bring humanitarian aid to the Iraqi people.
They believed that the PR war was as important to the effort as the war on the ground. And they thought that going in Qasr was going to be the first PR victory.
Confidence was high.
All the predictions were that this was going to be a cakewalk. They wouldn't put it in those terms, but you could tell that that's what the Marines were thinking.
There'd been so much talk in Washington and around the world from the Iraqis and the Iraqis that had lived in London that there'd be no resistance. I mean, one even told me, he said, we're going to give all of southern Iraq to you. You won't have any fighting at all.
But one day into the ground war, the first reports of combat casualties.
We are just receiving a report now about a second Marine who was killed in action.
There fellow Marines were having a tough time, I think at that point the bubble burst a bit, and I thought, wait, we've been told that these guys can't fight and these guys aren't going to fight, but they're fighting. What are we getting ourselves into here?
The regime is starting to lose control of their country.
Barely 2 days into the war against Iraq, and according to the Pentagon, it was being won handily.
I went back looking for some quotes from the military on that first day. Here's some things they said. The war is being won more quickly than we thought. Everything is going completely to plan, even quicker in many cases. The order should be given to march straight into Baghdad in the next 48 hours.
But a very different message was coming from Iraqi leadership.
We heard that the American forces have entered Qasr. This is ridiculous. Qasr will resist them, and we will see this is a fight.
In fact, coalition forces did capture it and do control the port of Qasr and also a growing portion of the country of Iraq.
Marines raised an American flag over the port city, but it was quickly taken down.
It was not secure. The battles went on for an entire week. I don't know how many times I heard them say, okay, it's secure now, and then there'd be another firefight. The guys would come out of the woodwork. That was the expression that they used.
U.S. and British forces were encountering unexpected resistance from unpredictable foes. They were called the Saddam Fedayeen.
We also began hearing for the first time about Iraqi paramilitaries dressed in civilian clothing. And they pointed out to us, these guys were fighting us. We captured them and they were not in uniform. They're not playing by the rules. That was very upsetting to the Marines.
But the U.S. military stuck to its plan, racing northward past the cities. Support staff, supply trucks, and maintenance personnel were forced to bring up the rear.
Everything was coming from northern Kuwait. Everything had to come by convoy. The beans, the bullets, the Band-Aids, the fuel, everything that made a military run depended on that route being secure.
But on Sunday, March 23rd, it became evident the supply route was not secure.
I remember as we approached the outskirts of Nasiriyah seeing several army trucks engulfed in flames. We saw their windshield riddled with bullets, their tires all flattened by the bullets, by the fire. I said, my goodness, this must have been really an intense battle. And within a matter of minutes, we learned that that was a U.S. military convoy that had come under attack.
What's your name? PFC Miller?
5 members of the Army's 507th Maintenance Company appeared on Arab TV as prisoners of war.
The coalition POWs that you are holding must be treated according to the Geneva Conventions.
The women and men of the 507th were cooks, drivers, and mechanics, and to see them in Iraqi captivity was a devastating blow to morale.
There was a real fear of becoming a POW and what that would entail.
Shana?
Some people said I'd kill myself before becoming a POW, particularly the women. The assumption was that they would be raped and that gang rape would be a part of it, and that it might be preferable to save a bullet for yourself.
Those soldiers of the 507th had taken a wrong turn.
It gave soldiers a sense of exactly how they were vulnerable in this war. They knew they weren't on the front line. But ambushes, Iraqi military mixed in with civilian populations, what might be behind the wave from the side of the road.
There was waving when the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines arrived at the outskirts of Nasiriyah. But things changed quickly.
The plan was everyone must go across the bridge and turn. So not go through the center of the city, which had an area called Ambush Alley.
The other companies of the battalion who were behind us, and especially one of them, the Charlie Company, instead of following us the way they're supposed to do, they lost sight of us
they couldn't see us because of the buildings. So they thought we'd gone on straight. So they went on straight and ran into the jaws of the beast.
We arrived there several hours later, and it was clear that something horrible had happened. A company of US Marines, more than 100 men, ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Just by us going to the right, instead of going straight, we're here. And those people that went straight, 18 of them aren't with us anymore.
2 wrong turns had led to the war's deadliest day for U.S. forces.
The commander of our battalion made it a top priority to go back and recover those bodies. And that's when I saw one of the most incredible scenes of that entire experience. Officers digging with their bare hands the ground, picking up body parts of their fallen comrades.
It was war at its most visceral. War that would soon start hitting home.
I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. It was not like it was a lot of casualties. It was one. It was my husband. And it's like, why him? I knew as soon as they drove up what they were coming to tell me. And I didn't want to hear it, but I had to face reality.
In the desert, it seemed like nature was joining the fight.
The Marines called it the MOAS, the mother of all sandstorms. And it really was. I mean, I had been in many sandstorms before, and this one was almost of biblical proportions.
Many battlefield operations came to a grinding halt.
Despite all this talk of high-tech gadgetry, wizardry, smart bombs, computers, nature had done what the Iraqi military couldn't. It stopped us dead.
It was the first week of the war, and it wasn't going really well.
It was a week that showed Iraqis would not follow the rules of war. A week that changed the coalition mindset.
Right now, we're kind of a little mad. I just want to get up there, do what we got to do, and get this over with.
Everything changed very, very, very quickly. I mean, you know, we went from we do not expect a fight to a big fight to shooting everything that moved because obviously it was very, very dangerous for them, and they felt that there was a lot of people there who wanted to kill them.
The Iraqis paid with blood to get rid of Saddam Hussein.
A week into the war, these images were not playing well. News of civilian casualties dominated the airwaves in the Arab world. Innocent blood spilled outside a Baghdad marketplace. Witnesses reported 15 dead. Coalition planes had just completed an early morning air raid with military targets less than 300 feet from homes. Instantly, the finger was pointed at the United States.
We don't know that those were ours. We can't say that we had anything to do with that at this point.
U.S. Central Command was still investigating the incident 2 days later when another explosion sounded in a residential area of Baghdad. This time, reports put the casualty count much higher, as many as 62 suspected dead, 49 more wounded. Arab TV called it a massacre.
The gush of patients was unstoppable. It was like an unstoppable flood.
Fawaz al-Mufti was a physician treating casualties in Baghdad.
They were all black days for Iraqis. It hurts to see like a brother or a sister or a son slaughtered. And I mean that, like slaughtered.
Death and destruction undercut the image of the coalition invasion as a force for good, an image further damaged by the wall-to-wall coverage of the Arab news channels.
The Arab audience got a dramatically different narrative from that of its American counterpart. That is what I call the clash of two narratives. While the American media focused on the technologically advanced military apparatus,
10% are so-called dumb bombs, 90% precision.
the Arab media focused on the destruction that this apparatus visited on Iraq.
These are pictures that we have just received showing the aftermath of the US-British strike to a popular market in Ashulla neighborhood.
And the Arab media did not pretend to be neutral in this particular campaign. The Arab media tried to focus on the Iraqi narrative. As Al Jazeera put it, we shall not allow Iraqi voices to be silent.
After a full accounting of bombs dropped and targets hit, U.S. Central Command denied any part in the first marketplace explosion.
There's absolutely nothing that joins that to coalition action.
The cause of the second blast remained unresolved. No official tally of Iraqi civilian casualties exists. But after the war's end, media surveys of Baghdad hospitals alone counted almost 2,000 civilian deaths.
They're totally regrettable, but they're low by historical standards. When the Germans attacked Belgrade on the 6th of April, 1941, they began the attack with a bombing campaign. 17,000 Yugoslavs were killed in the first night of the German bombing.
But a new Iraqi tactic was about to make things worse. Confronted with a superior military power, the Iraqis resorted to unconventional warfare. A suicide bomber in a taxi attacked a military checkpoint near Najaf. 4 U.S. soldiers were killed.
The first suicide bombing was unanticipated, and the tragedy of it was it required the United States military to change its tactics. The U.S. had to take a very cautious approach about stopping vehicles before they reached checkpoints, making people get out of cars, and anybody who didn't follow the instructions and continued to proceed toward the checkpoint was essentially taken out.
Just 2 days after the suicide bombing, a vehicle packed with women and children was fired on after it ran a roadblock. Few survived. The Arab world expressed rage over the growing number of civilian casualties. Even U.S. allies, including Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak.
When this war is over, if it's over, it will have significant consequences. Terrorist activities will rise, the terrorist organizations will unite, and instead of having only one bin Laden, we'll have 100 bin Ladens.
Probably it's an exaggeration on the part of Mubarak, but my own judgment is that by deepening the sense of victimization and defeat and humiliation on the part of the youth, this war is likely to make the youth a fertile ground for recruitment by militant causes like that of Al-Qaeda.
And lying in a hospital bed, a potential poster child for their cause.
12-year-old Ali Abbas, he heard planes flying overhead. Next thing he knew, members of his family were dead. He had no arms. He woke up in a hospital where he was dying. His photo was taken. It appeared in magazines around the world. Unbeknownst to him at the time, he was becoming the symbol of the suffering of civilians in this war. Ali has gotten offers to be taken to the United States to be treated in an American hospital. And his response to that was, these are the people who killed my family. I don't want to go there, anywhere but there.
The war was barely a week old, and a wind of uncertainty was blowing across the desert. Sandstorms, suicide bombings, Fedayeen attacks. The coalition advance seemed to be slowing. Its war plan was being tested.
Its chief characteristic is flexibility, adaptability.
The war plan used by coalition forces in Iraq had been a work in progress for over a year. The heart of the strategy, a quick strike at the heart of the regime.
Baghdad has always been the strategic,
operational and to some degree tactical center of gravity for the regime of Saddam Hussein.
As we move up Highway 6, still there is a threat.
The goal was to get to Baghdad and at the same time prevent the enemy from setting up a defense there. It was to grip the Republican Guard, smash it, and drive through to Baghdad.
Republican Guard Al-Nida, division commander, was here.
How to achieve that goal was the subject of considerable pre-war debate.
Should you go with a plan that has a reasonable chance of accomplishing the mission quickly at a reasonable cost, or should you go with a plan that does everything possible to minimize risks, at least military risks, even though it may increase diplomatic risks, take longer, and cost more?
The center of that question was troop strength. In the first Gulf War, the coalition had an overwhelming number of forces. General Tommy Franks and other military planners reportedly wanted a similar force this time.
We're confident we can achieve our objectives.
But there were others, most notably Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who wanted a lighter, more agile force.
1469er.
Less manpower, more use of special forces.
Right there.
And precision bombing.
This war plan went through at least 20 different versions, I'm told. Things went in, things were taken out, more troops were put in, different troops, different mix of troops, timelines were worked out. And eventually, they settled on this plan that everybody was pretty much happy with.
What emerged was a compromise. 250,000 troops, but with an increased role for special forces and precision weaponry. Fedayeen resistance would put the plan in question.
All right, I'm going in.
Troops who had expected to be racing for Baghdad
All right, I got nothing.
suddenly found themselves with a different mission.
Double lock. Double lock. Watch out. Watch out. Watch out.
It went from a real war to guerrilla war in the span of 2 days.
Face the fucking front.
And when it did that, there was a lot of second guessing. Oh, maybe we didn't send enough troops. Maybe we should have had an air campaign that went longer. It was all this kind of questioning. And it wasn't just by the folks in the Pentagon, and it wasn't just by the American public, but it came down to our unit.
Get inside! Get inside!
Boy, this is not going the way we thought.
A concern soon echoed by a general. General William Wallace was quoted as saying, "The enemy we're fighting is a bit different from the one we had war-gamed against." The comment touched off a firestorm of debate.
The reality is we have adequate force to do what we need to do, and we remain satisfied with that.
The White House got involved, trying to stem perceptions the plan was in trouble.
They did realize that they had a perception problem, and one of their ways in dealing with it was to use the president. The president on the first Saturday went out of his way to make sure that they leaked, that he told Secretary Rumsfeld during a meeting, don't worry, just full speed ahead.
The Iraqi regime will be ended.
And in a White House that says it doesn't like leaks, they deliberately leaked that.
Behind the scenes, military planners were debating whether to change the strategy and turn the focus towards the Fedayeen in the south.
There was a big debate at that point whether they ought to pause and bring in more troops and take a more cautious approach, or whether they ought to stick to their plan, which was a little more bold and audacious, and continue to push toward Baghdad.
But despite the debate and the media hand-wringing, the facts on the ground showed a war that was going far better than people thought.
There's a different view down on planet Earth, if you will, as we describe it, the closer you get to the line.
Fire!
They were controlling a fairly sizable amount of Iraq in a very short time, and they were looking at it, the big picture, and thinking things are going pretty well.
The result? Extra troops were deployed to help secure the supply lines. But the main goal, the push to Baghdad, did not change. If anything, the troops were more determined than ever.
Just before going to Nasiriyah, the Marines from my company got a pep talk from the commander. He told them, here's what's going to happen. This war is changing. We're going to be doing door-to-door fighting, and it's going to be ugly. What he meant by that was all of these attacks that had been coming from out of the woodwork, all of these ambushes, we're not going to hold back anymore.
A storm had been weathered. The tide had begun to turn. Baghdad lay just ahead.
The Medina division, according to some sources, has now been degraded by Air Force bombing by at least 50, perhaps upwards of 70%.
What was seen was hit, and what was hit was destroyed.
Some units are laying down their arms and surrendering to coalition forces, wisely choosing not to die, fighting for a doomed regime.
We see some very significant weakening, and it will hit a tipping point in some of their formations.
573-1022. Over.
It was a war plan second-guessed by pundits and generals, but after 2 weeks of combat, it was a war plan yielding results.
Baghdad is slowly being encircled. Pockets of resistance are being isolated. The oil fields are secure. Humanitarian aid is beginning to flow. I have total confidence in the plan.
In the north, coalition aircraft pounded the Iraqi positions,
Once he gets in contact with the aircraft, then they could drop the bombs.
while U.S. Green Beret quietly aided the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters.
There's our B-52.
But the war in the south got most of the attention. The original plan called for U.S. and British forces to steer clear of the cities between Kuwait and Baghdad. That doctrine changed. Ambushes, paramilitary attacks, suicide bombings were new Iraqi tactics. The coalition adapted. Wherever the enemy hid, the enemy would be hunted.
And this is where it gets dangerous for the Marines, because it is now house-to-house kind of searching.
Can you see anything?
It's dark.
Come out, come out, come out. Come out, come out. Open the door, open the door. Get your hands up and come outside. Come outside. Everybody in the house needs to come outside. Out here in the yard, out here in the yard. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Let's start, sir.
Yeah, clear the house now.
No one there, no one.
No one in there?
At that moment, you feel sort of very angry at the Marines because of the trauma that they're inducing on a family.
Hey, let's sweep on down straight.
And you forget that, they're trying to clear a village, a town, and they're trying to control a population, and that there are embedded within that population people trying to murder them at that moment.
The tough tactics were part of a coalition strategy, not to let unconventional warfare slow them down.
On a larger sense, basically what General Franks said, what Rumsfeld said, what Tony Blair said was, do your damnedest. Have at it. If you think we won't come in the city, you're wrong. If you think a few suicide bombers are going to make us run, you're wrong. If you think that we won't fight in chemical warfare, you are wrong.
Basra was a test of that strategy. British troops attacked on two fronts. Search and destroy missions against the Fedayeen, while trying to win the hearts and minds of civilians.
If you meet and greet the people, if you get down to their level, if you play with their children and give them sweeties, it's much harder for someone to shoot you in the back.
In towns across Iraq, the mood was unpredictable. In the city of Najaf, blocks away from a sacred Shia mosque, soldiers from the 101st Airborne ran into trouble. The troops were heading to a house for a prearranged meeting with the local religious leader.
And they thought that the soldiers were going to the mosque. So this perfectly friendly crowd, slightly reserved, all of a sudden just goes berserk in the course of 30 seconds. And the commander kind of comes up, this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes. So he tells his soldiers to take a knee.
Everybody relax.
And so they all get down on one knee. And then he says, you know, try and appear, you know, friendly. Friendly as you can, you know, with a weapon. And point your weapons at the ground.
Vehicles, turn around. Say again, all vehicles, turn around. Be prepared to move the other direction. Time now.
The crowd saw that they were pulling back, so they decided to pull back. And eventually the colonel decided, well, you know, perhaps they were going to lose face, but it was better to lose this battle than to lose the war.
Get in formation. We got to move. Turn around. Okay. Just turn around and go.
He went out towards the crowd, bowed to them, waved, and just walked away.
Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away, Jessica Lynch, a prisoner of war from the 507th Maintenance Company, arrived in Germany, the final leg of a high-profile rescue played out before Defense Department cameras.
So there's a real ethic in the military about not leaving anyone behind.
We were told that there was going to be a rescue, and they were talking about precious cargo. You know, Jessica Lynch was nicknamed or dubbed as precious cargo.
I remember hearing the helicopters go up the river, and a Marine saying, "There they are, they're going in for the kill, they're going in for the rescue right now."
Within minutes that the operation began, we heard, you know, precious cargo secured.
The Pentagon presented dramatic video of the rescue. Later accounts from Iraqi doctors at the hospital said Jessica Lynch had been well treated and that there was no armed resistance to the American troops. Whether or not the Pentagon overplayed the drama of the rescue, there's no question it boosted public morale.
When you have the opportunity to get back one of your own off the battlefield, I think it's something that makes everybody feel good.
Troop morale was high as well. The U.S. 3rd Infantry and the Royal Marines completed their northward drives across Iraq. The U.S. 101st Airborne controlled key points throughout the southern region. U.S. Marines had pushed up the Tigris. The coalition was converging on Baghdad.
The course is set. We're on the advance. And we will accept nothing less than complete and final victory.
The end seemed within reach. But ahead lay the heart of a desperate regime and the dreaded red zone.
You're first block, bring it in! Go, hurry up! Let's go!
What was unprecedented was the coordination of the air and the ground and the grip of the advance. There was no give in this force. It was very, very powerful at the front end.
People have known that they can't match the Americans tank for tank, plane for plane, person for person. So the idea is, well, we'll introduce chemical warfare because we know coalition won't use that.
I'm sure there was concern that he might employ chemical weapons. If he had used them, or if he does use them, we will fight through it.
The final advance into Baghdad was fast and violent.
We came under some very serious fire. At one point, I could see bullets, you know, hitting in the dust beside us 20 feet out on either side of the car. We could hear the RPGs going overhead. We could see the anti-aircraft 20 millimeter going over our head.
American troops were about to enter the red zone, the point where Iraqi forces might attack with weapons of mass destruction. Here, in a meeting with his land war commanders, Lieutenant General David McKiernan.
Starting today and tonight and over the next couple of days is the start of the big maneuver fight in the red zone here. The Baghdad division is going to get isolated. It is going down. I came up with the term the red zone kind of based on that analogy that you know, you get inside the 20-yard line and maybe it gets a little harder to move the ball, and you got to pound it out a little bit then. And we thought that when we got to that point, it might be a trigger for his use of weapons of mass destruction.
But the Iraqi army proved no match for coalition forces. At a narrow strip of land called the Karbala Gap, a place where military leaders first feared a chemical attack, American troops pounded the Republican Guard's Medina Division.
The 3rd Infantry Division took Karbala with a minimum of fight. This as it continues to push ever closer towards the southern suburbs of Baghdad.
Iraqi fighters vanished after encountering U.S. troops in Najaf.
All of the Fedayeen fighters, the so-called, paramilitary fighters, had fled. The commander said that he'd given them what he called a golden bridge, a way out of the city to the north.
And Iraqi troops abandoned positions in the hills of northern Iraq.
There were no surrenders. They essentially disappeared.
CNN photographer David Turnley encountered a former member of the Republican Guard who had just fled the battlefield. The man shielded his face with his own child so he would not be recognized.
He looked very pained, as if the life spirit had been drained from him. And he said, "I didn't tell you this, but actually, I only arrived here last night an hour before you did. I had been a major officer in the Republican Guard in Baghdad, and I've just come home." We were not supportive of Saddam Hussein. He said, that's not my problem right now. He said, the question we have just continued to ask ourselves is, did he have to be removed this way? Was there not another way to do it?
When we did our assessment of Saddam Hussein, his regime, and his military capabilities, we knew before we ever started this fight that he had morale problems, he had manning problems, he had equipment problems. We thought if we put a lot of heat on from the start, that we could probably break their will to fight.
In the end, the Iraqi army was simply overwhelmed.
It's a remarkable mismatch between forces. One force, the best in the world, maybe the best it's ever been, well-trained, incredible technology, well-led, determined. The other force, not well-trained, demoralized, dug in. The defender should have had the advantage by any war game you'd ever run. In this case, the defender was obliterated.
Even as American troops dominated the field and edged closer to Baghdad, Iraq's information minister insisted that Iraq had the upper hand.
They are not near Baghdad. Don't believe them.
Could they be trapped? Could they be trapped?
They are trapped everywhere in the country.
This Baghdad resident said early in the war, Iraqis took al-Sahaf's words to heart.
When Sahaf would come out and, boost our ego, boost our self-confidence, saying, we did this, we're going to do that, we wanted to believe. We wanted to believe that, hey, maybe people are actually fighting. Maybe Saddam Hussein could have changed.
There's firing off to the right, big firing off to the right.
Even with the defeat of Iraq's Republican Guard, U.S. troops took steady fire as they moved within miles of Baghdad. The danger intensified the closer they got.
As much as we are making good progress, and we are, the toughest fighting could lie ahead. The likelihood that they might use chemical weapons is in front of us now.
We have seen probably 20 or so Iraqi soldiers dead, lying close to the road. Virtually everyone that our crew has been able to check was carrying a gas mask.
Let's go!
But American troops were also prepared.
It's unlikely that Saddam, even if he had wanted to fire chemicals, it's unlikely he could have. And we weren't presenting a very lucrative target. We were spread out, we were armored, we were protected. His short-range chemical weapons delivery systems wouldn't have had much of an impact.
But for U.S. soldiers, the possibility of a chemical attack had enormous impact.
The orders were for 7th Cavalry and every other Army unit that I knew, if you get hit with an artillery barrage, chemical, biological weapons, you put on your chemical weapons suit and you fight right on through it. And when you achieve your objective, then you come back and you decontaminate. It was a very real threat. It was present in everyone's minds. There was never any thought that the Iraqis had a hope in hell against the U.S. Army. But that one wild card in the deck of chemical or biological weapons was always there.
In the end, Iraq never played that card. But as U.S. troops forged through the red zone and into Baghdad, another threat loomed.
gotta work our way north.
As U.S. troops sprinted toward Baghdad, Iraqi citizens who could moved out. The buzz in the capital, war in the streets was about to happen.
Lots of rumors that Saddam Hussein was going to retreat into Baghdad. From the airport, then retreat into Baghdad and lure them into his den, into where he is going to end everything.
In the war room in Kuwait, the ground war commander, General McKiernan, confirmed from day one of the campaign, every maneuver was intended to lead to this, the battle for Baghdad.
As fast as we could get through this crust of the regular army defense in the southern part of Iraq and put pressure on the heart of the regime, Baghdad, is what we wanted to do while we went for the jugular.
The first big target, Saddam International Airport, 12 miles from downtown Baghdad.
Right now, 5th Corps, in about 10 minutes, they're going to begin an attack to seize the airport. For us, it's a huge strategic objective because anyone who was planning to try to leave by air can no longer do so.
The Iraqis countered with a media offensive.
Dear people of Baghdad and people of Iraq, you are a symbol of dignity, and with God's help, you will be victorious.
Later, Arab television stations broadcast video of Saddam strolling through a Baghdad neighborhood. The smoke in the picture suggested to U.S. intelligence officials the tape might have been shot that day, April 4th, meaning Saddam was still alive. After closer study, they weren't so sure.
They have now concluded, based on what they saw of the buildings and certain changes that they say have occurred, that the tape was actually made in the first week of March, not April 4th, as was claimed. It's a fake. It may be real Saddam, but it's not April 4th.
Fake Saddam or not, it took only about a day of fighting for the U.S. to proclaim it had secured the airport.
By dawn this morning, the coalition had seized the international airport west of Baghdad, formerly known as Saddam International Airport. The airport now has a new name, Baghdad International Airport, and it is the gateway to the future Iraq.
On the doorstep of the capital, U.S. troops were facing one of the worst fears of the war, the possibility of door-to-door urban combat.
Your team's coming up here with us.
We got a window to the right.
All right, we'll see it.
Iraqi Information Minister Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf issued a threat.
This evening we will carry out something that is untraditional against them, a military action that is not ordinary.
Not conventional.
The threat was an empty one. In fact, the U.S. grew bolder with audacious daytime raids into Baghdad proper. Thunder runs, they were called. This exclusive video taken from the turret of a U.S. tank shows one of the first runs into the Iraqi capital.
These guys just seem to be everywhere. And as a tanker, we talk about having as much standoff from the enemy as we can. But these guys were so close that day and dug in, along both sides of the road that there was this feeling that, well, we need to fire them with everything we got.
The thunder runs soon focused on presidential palaces.
These attacks that were initially launched on Baghdad were probing attacks to determine exactly what kind of response they would get. When the U.S. Army went into Saddam Hussein's palaces, the initial plan was to go to the palaces, go through them, and then leave. But when they got there and they realized that there was nobody really challenging them and they could stay, they did stay.
Isn't it time now that you surrendered or sued for peace?
They are going to surrender. They are going to surrender or be burnt in their tanks.
By this time, the cheeky announcements of al-Sahaf had earned him a worldwide cult following.
They are beginning to commit suicide on the walls of Baghdad.
The coalition was suffering few casualties, but Baghdad hospitals were filling with Iraqi wounded and dead.
All day long, we were with the patients, resuscitating. The whole place, I don't want to sound disgusting, but the whole place smelled so much like blood.
While not targeting civilians, the U.S. was firing on buildings used as cover for attacks on them. News organizations questioned the judgment of advancing troops when a U.S. tank fired on the Palestine hotel, killing 2 journalists. The U.S. said there were snipers there. Journalists staying at the hotel said they neither saw nor heard sniper fire. The same day, a U.S. airstrike on a building housing Arab media killed an Al Jazeera television reporter. Al Jazeera, which had been showing a lot of pictures of dead Iraqi civilians, claimed it was deliberately targeted. The Pentagon denied it. Unfazed by the criticism, the U.S. moved forward relentlessly in the city center. And from the air, another decapitation strike against Saddam Hussein and his family. 12 minutes after receiving a tip that Saddam and his sons were in a bunker beneath a restaurant, a B-1 dropped 8,000 pounds of bombs on the target.
My sources tell me there was a human agent, at least one, on the ground who thought he saw, and it was a he, Saddam Hussein going into that building or that little complex of buildings. As I speak to you now, they are still not sure whether Saddam Hussein was in that building or not.
The feared urban combat did not materialize. The Republican Guard was putting up less of a fight than many had expected.
The Republican Guards obviously haven't received good training. They weren't well equipped. They were a force that's been degraded even since the 1991 experience. Air power took care of much of the Republican Guards.
With Iraqi forces dead, captured, or in full retreat, Baghdad was poised to fall.
Goodbye, Saddam! There he goes! There he goes!
When the statue fell, that was when Iraqis started to believe, hey, it might be the end. Many people, deep inside, they wanted to scream out and shout, like, Viva America. But that didn't happen. Because everyone was, they were all afraid, like, hey, he's coming back.
In the streets of Baghdad, rumbling tanks, jubilant crowds, celebration, liberation, and chaos.
It was an extraordinary sight for one who had covered Iraq in the past to see the center of the city teeming with American tanks and Marines.
So far, so fast. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The battle for Baghdad was expected to be the big one. By April 9th, however, U.S. tanks and armor were in the center of the Iraqi capital, taking charge and already running out of targets. In the end, one image told the entire story. Saddam's rule was all but over. The noose had tightened, literally and figuratively. But even this poignant moment was open to interpretation. One simple gesture exposed the thin line between liberation and the fears of occupation.
Many Arabs and Muslims, I would argue, were happy to see the tyranny is over. Yet they were not convinced, because on Arab television stations, they saw an American Marine wrapping an American flag around Saddam Hussein's face.
The symbolism was not lost on the Pentagon either.
There was sort of an uh-oh moment. Uh-oh, that's not the picture that we want to send. On the other hand, nobody was really too upset about it. That's what Marines do.
While there was jubilation in some quarters of Baghdad, there was open warfare, even anarchy in others.
There was a certain euphoria that was contagious, that was passing from the people in the streets to the Marines on their vehicles. And then we came around one corner. And then suddenly sideways, off to our left, there were several explosions. And those were RPG rounds or missiles coming. And then gunfire.
Just blocks away from the dancing and Firdos Square, the 1st Battalion 7th Marines were engaged in a blistering firefight at Baghdad University.
Yeah! It was just so odd to hear all the while in my earpiece. People cheering, people celebrating, and yet I thought from where we were at that moment, we stood a very good chance of dying amidst all of that joy.
In the early hours of the new Iraq, Baghdad was a city of extremes, euphoria and firefights, life and death. Beyond the loss of life, there was another casualty of war, law and order. Baghdad descended into chaos.
It was wild that first week. Anything that anybody could get their hands on was taken. Even the soldiers we spoke to were quite stunned by what they had seen. They destroyed ministries, they destroyed warehouses, they destroyed all sorts of places, including hospitals. It was very violent in its intensity.
Nothing seemed safe or sacred in Baghdad, not even history. In the orgy of looting, mobs ransacked the Iraqi National Museum, leaving Iraq's cultural heritage in pieces on the ground.
These images have done a great deal of damage to America's campaign in Iraq.
Back up, back up, back up.
Why did the United States, many Iraqis and Arabs argue, make sure that the oil ministry is well guarded and preserved? Couldn't the United States do the same thing to Iraqi museums?
This was one of the functions of succeeding faster than they expected. They didn't have enough troops on the ground to prevent all this looting. But a lot of that looting that took place while there was still fighting going on in the city.
In 3 short days, American troops had gone from heroes to reluctant policemen.
The only other way I could have stopped it was to start using force, and I'm not going to start using force on these people. I think they've had enough of that.
The battle for Baghdad was over, but the battle to win the peace had only just begun. Baghdad had fallen. The regime's victims were just beginning to emerge.
I think what you're seeing there, the beginning of a very long process, a long reckoning with the past, and with accepting what had happened under the Saddam regime, which they were not allowed to talk about even among themselves during Saddam's regime.
With the capital captured, military attention turned to the north. In late March, paratroopers from the 173rd Airborne Division had dropped into northern Iraq to establish the so-called Northern Front.
Hi, good morning. Brent Sadler from CNN.
U.S. Special Forces and journalists were already there.
Welcome to Iraq. Thank you very much.
That lightly armed force was largely symbolic, intended to reassure Turkey of an American presence in the primarily Kurdish region. The historic antagonism between Turks and Kurds had prompted a Turkish threat to send thousands of troops into northern Iraq if a war started. Among other things, Turkey was fearful of Kurdish control of Iraq's northern oil fields.
The Iraqi Kurds were making it quite clear that if Turkey intervened militarily, there would be a war within the wider war of an invasion against Iraq. This was very, very serious indeed.
With difficulties getting its own troops in, the U.S. turned to Kurdish ground forces, the Peshmerga, literally those who faced death. They numbered 60 to 70,000 soldiers. To appease Turkey, the Kurds agreed to operate under the command of U.S. Special Forces. Here's an example of how the cooperation worked on the battlefield. The target, Iraqi bunkers.
Tell you what, that one right there that I'm looking at looks like that's a net over top of that joint.
Special Forces call in coordinates to a B-52 in the sky.
Right there,
Another strike.
Fire!
This time with mortars.
Roger, we're firing for the first bunker. We need you to adjust us.
The Peshmerga occupied town after town. Always in the background, U.S. Special Forces. Iraq's northern front was collapsing.
This gives you a sense of what it's like at the very edge of a front line that's just fallen to these Iraqi Kurds. They've just taken this territory and they are ecstatic.
Iraqi soldiers surrendered by the thousands.
Many of these soldiers were walking on tarmac in their bare feet. They were giving V signs. These were defeated soldiers, but they were happy soldiers. Why were they happy? Because 1, they were leaving the army of Saddam Hussein, 2, they were alive, and 3, they were going home. Home was a 7-day walk to southern Iraq. It was one of the most memorable moments of the war for me.
One day after Baghdad fell, coalition and Kurdish troops rolled through Kirkuk, Mosul the day after that. There were celebrations across northern Iraq. The Kurds kept their word not to operate independently of U.S. command. The Turks had stayed put. The northern oil fields were secured. Eyes turned southward to Saddam Hussein's hometown, Tikrit, for a possible last stand. Marines advancing on Tikrit got an unexpected emotional lift when they found 7 U.S. prisoners of war, 5 from Private Jessica Lynch's outfit, the 507th Maintenance Company, and 2 Apache helicopter pilots who'd been shot down 3 weeks before. CNN's Bob Franken saw the POWs when they were evacuated to an air base in Iraq.
The first 5 who got off were literally running. Only 1 had his arm in a sling, but he was clearly in good health. Big grins on their faces, running out of jubilation. The other 2 were hobbling a little bit, but they were clearly people who had this huge weight lifted off their shoulders. So when the POWs came off, and as they drove down this line to go from their helicopter to the plane that would take them to Kuwait, there was this line of applause. It was just, everybody was on cloud 9.
It's just a good way to start off the morning to have been notified that 7 of our fellow Americans are going to be home here pretty soon.
When the troops finally reached Tikrit, it went down with a whimper, not a bang. It was a firefight, but it was short.
Okay, that's gunfire. Okay, you've just come to attack.
Well, this was Saddam Hussein's stronghold, and it was supposed to be well guarded, well protected, and fortified. And it had been. But by the time the forces got there, after Baghdad had fallen and after they'd been pounded from the air for days, there wasn't much left of that defense, and it fell pretty quickly. It took a day and a night for the Marines to push into the city and defeat the last of the holdouts.
The war was virtually over. But for the people of Iraq, it was just the beginning of dealing with the legacy of Saddam Hussein's rule.
I heard people saying, they're prisoners under the ground here. We hear their voices. They really are down there. They had me convinced.
Do you know for sure that there are people down there? Yeah. Maybe thousands.
People who'd been tortured and who were under the ground, put there by Saddam Hussein's secret police.
Voices is heard down in water.
Down in the water?
Yeah.
Who?
We don't know. It must be prisoners.
And then, after a while, it dawned on me that when they were hearing voices, they're really just hearing the echoes of their own voices. The echoes of people at the other wells all yelling in, and they were feeding off of one another in this burst of enthusiasm and misguided hope that there really were prisoners down below. It was convincing for a bit, but then it occurred to us that these people were just hearing ghosts. I think there's a lot of ghosts from Iraq's past these people are going to have to deal with and reckon with for many years to come.
A war more than a year in the making was all but over in less than a month.
I think when one looks back at the war in Iraq, 9/11 is the big date to look at. Everything changed at that point. The entire landscape of our country and the way that we look at the world changed. Justice is what we call it. We're going to get justice. Bad guys are going to face their moment, and justice will prevail. Reality is it's revenge.
A brutal regime was overthrown, a people liberated from tyranny.
All Iraqis were happy. They were happy to the heart that Saddam Hussein had gone. A nightmare, a black cloud just shifted away.
But the fall of Saddam Hussein set off what may be a much larger battle over the future of Iraq.
It's the old cliche. Winning the military victory is easy compared to winning the peace.
Beyond the debate over right and wrong, beyond the weapons of mass destruction, and the ultimate fate of Saddam Hussein, there is the question of what's next? Can peace and democracy flourish in Iraq? And can they spread across the Middle East?
Many Arabs and Muslims believe that the United States uses the question of democracy as a stick to punish its enemies while shutting its eyes and ears to violations, human rights violations by its local allies.
Was it a military victory? Yes. Who can argue that? Was it a long-term military victory? Did we win our larger objectives in our Middle Eastern policy? It's too early to tell. Let's give it 20 years from now.
After Saddam, uncertainty is one of the only certainties in Iraq. And experts say that's likely to be the situation for some time to come.
I hope the Americans don't leave before they settle everything, because if they leave now, Iraq will be left in total chaos.
And no one at the Pentagon is predicting how long it will take. In the past, when they predicted how long the United States might be involved in a country, they've always been wrong.
We will stay as long as necessary to make sure that the Iraqi people have a government of, by, and for the Iraqi people, and then we'll come home.
Their worst nightmare? Fundamentalist Islamic regime that has a whole lot of oil that says the United States is Satan. They don't think that's going to happen. But I think that would be their worst nightmare.
The framework for the new Iraq is fraught with pitfalls, and the predictions run the gamut.
While for many Americans this war was about combating terrorism, for many Arabs and Muslims this war was about subjugating Iraq and the Iraqis and controlling their resources. What the American invasion did was to unite not only militant against American foreign policy, but even moderates.
If the United States can rebuild an infrastructure, help them get a constitution, control their oil reserves for a short time, and then turn them over to the Iraqi people, then I think the word is democracy is the new trend for young people. And look out, Syria. Look out, Iran. You're next.
In post-war Iraq, patience, persistence, and luck may ultimately be the most powerful weapons in the war to win the peace.
The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort.
What historians are going to question is, can one impose democracy? And can we get rid of rogues every time we feel like it without costing the American people $100 or $200 billion to do it and creating more problems than it solves? And the verdict on Iraq's not out yet.
Everywhere that freedom arrives, humanity rejoices. And everywhere that freedom stirs, let tyrants fear.